There is something profoundly tragic about watching someone drown in waters they refuse to acknowledge they are standing in. They shout for help, flailing their arms, gasping for breath, begging for rescue, yet they never once consider that they could simply stand up. These are the people who refuse to take responsibility. They may look like victims on the surface, but their refusal to claim any ownership over their choices, patterns, or beliefs makes helping them not only ineffective, it becomes a slow erosion of your own soul. At the heart of every transformation lies accountability. Not the kind that shamas, but the kind that awakens, the kind that says, this life, this story, this pain, it's mine. Without this turning point, no amount of guidance, support, or sacrifice will make a difference. You can give endlessly. You can offer your heart, your home, your time, your money. You can be the emotional ambulance that arrives every time they crash. But if they will not face their own reflection, if they continue to blame others, circumstances, or fate, your help becomes an enabler, not a cure. Many people, particularly those with deep empathy, are drawn to the wounded. We see someone suffering, and we want to relieve that pain. But not all suffering leads to awakening. Some suffering becomes a lifestyle. Some people become so identified with their wounds that to release them would mean losing their sense of self. And so they cling. Not to healing, but to helplessness. It gives them power in relationships. It draws in caretakers. It keeps the focus on their pain so they never have to take a hard look at their part in it. Take the example of Sarah, a young woman in her 30s who had been chronically underemployed for years. Every few months she would call her best friend, sobbing. Another boss was unfair, another job was toxic, another coworker had targeted her. At first, her friend listened with empathy, offering support, helping her with resumes, even giving her money. But after the fifth or sixth time, something felt off. The stories never changed. The jobs never lasted. And any feedback that suggested Sarah might be part of the problem was met with deflection or outrage. In truth, Sarah wasn't looking for help. She was looking for confirmation that the world was to blame, that she was powerless, and that nothing was her fault. Helping people like this becomes an endless cycle of emotional labor. It drains you, it frustrates you, and slowly it begins to distort your perception. You start to question your instincts. You wonder if you're being too harsh, too cold, too selfish. But what you're really experiencing is the cognitive dissonance of giving energy to someone who doesn't want to grow. And that is one of the most painful lessons to learn. Not everyone wants freedom, some want pity. And pity, though dressed in empathy, is not love. It is a trap that locks both people in a loop of emotional paralysis. The child in us, especially those raised to be overly responsible, wants to believe we can fix people. That if we just say it the right way, help hard enough, love fiercely enough, they will change. But healing does not work that way. Change is an inside job. And responsibility is the key that opens the door. Without it, you are not helping someone, you are carrying them. And when you carry someone who refuses to walk, your own journey comes to a halt. You lose your rhythm. You forget your path. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is to step back, to let them fall, to allow them to face the discomfort they've spent years avoiding. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is often the messenger. But when you constantly shield someone from their consequences, you intercept that message. You delay their awakening. You play God in a life that was never yours to fix. And in the process, you slowly abandon yourself. We must remember, being there for someone is not the same as being responsible for them. You can hold space without holding their burden. You can care without carrying. This is the boundary that protects your soul. This is the discernment that transforms help from codependency into compassion. If someone is not willing to say, yes, this is my pattern. Yes, I need to change. Yes, I have contributed to this pain. They are not ready for your help. They are not in a position to grow. And you, in trying to save them, may lose yourself. There's no shame in choosing not to help someone who refuses to help themselves. That choice isn't heartless, it's sacred. It's a declaration that your time, your energy, and your peace are not up for sacrifice. It's a stand for your integrity. Because the moment you rescue someone who is unwilling to change, you become complicit in their stagnation. And if you do that long enough, you'll wake up one day exhausted, bitter, and disconnected from your own life. Help the willing. Support the striving. Be there for those who meet you in the middle. But walk away from those who refuse to lift their own hands. They must come to their reckoning. Not because they deserve to suffer, but because that reckoning is the first step toward transformation. And no one can take it for them but themselves. There's a kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't cure. It's the soul tiredness that sets in when you give and give to someone who only knows how to take. This isn't the fatigue that comes from a busy life or heavy work. It's the ache of invisible labor, the kind that eats at your energy, your joy, your light. It's what happens when you are in relationship with someone who drains you, not because they're in need, but because they believe it's your job to carry what they refuse to hold themselves. These people are everywhere. They show up with a soft voice and desperate eyes. They speak of their loneliness, their pain, their chaos. They don't ask directly for help, not always, but their presence demands it. They are the constant storm. Every day is a crisis, every moment an emergency, and in their orbit your needs disappear. You learn quickly that there is no room for your sadness, your struggle, or even your silence. You become the therapist, the cheerleader, the anchor, the mother. And you begin to believe that if you just stay strong enough, long enough, you might finally be enough for them to feel whole. But here's the truth. No one can be filled by another person's sacrifice. People who constantly drain you are often not malicious. They are just unconsciously addicted to external soothing. They've never learned to self-regulate. They don't know how to sit with discomfort, so they spill it into the laps of those around them. And because they fear abandonment, they keep others tethered through guilt, crisis, or need. If you try to step away, even briefly, they panic. Not because they love you, but because they then made you their source of survival. What's dangerous here is not just the energy imbalance. It's the way your own sense of self starts to erode. At first, you may dismiss your exhaustion. You'll say, they need me. You'll minimize your inner resistance. It's not that bad. But over time, something shifts. You stop smiling. You stop dreaming. You stop hearing your own voice. And yet, when you try to express your need for reciprocity, they make you feel guilty. They may say things like, "You're all I have," or "No one else cares about me like you do." These words sound sweet, but they are laced with emotional debt. And slowly, your relationship becomes a contract you never signed, a contract that demands your endless availability in exchange for conditional affection. I once knew a man, gentle-hearted and wise, who spent a decade emotionally supporting a friend through addiction, broken relationships, and financial disaster. Every time she relapsed, he was there. Every time she called in the middle of the night, he answered. But during the one season of his life when he lost a parent, she disappeared. Not out of cruelty, but because she had nothing to offer him. She was incapable of being there for someone else. And that realization shattered him, not because of her absence, but because it revealed the truth. He had built a relationship on a one-way street. This kind of dynamic often hides in noble clothing. We call it loyalty. We call it being a good friend, a good partner, a good person. But true goodness does not ask you to disappear. It does not require your silence. If love costs your identity, your peace, or your well-being, it is not love, it is emotional servitude. Those who take without giving may not even realize what they're doing. Often they've been conditioned by their own wounds. Maybe they had parents who neglected them, and now they fear losing anyone who pays them attention. Maybe they learned that survival meant attaching themselves to strong, empathic people. But their history does not justify your depletion. Compassion does not mean compliance. You can hold someone's pain with empathy while still protecting your own soul from harm. What makes these relationships even harder to leave is the internal programming so many of us carry. If you grew up in a home where love was earned through usefulness, self-sacrifice, or silence, you'll unconsciously gravitate toward people who mirror that dynamic. You'll confuse overgiving with intimacy. You'll call exhaustion connection. But that's not love, that's reenactment. And until you break that cycle, you'll keep calling in people who demand more than you can afford to give. The turning point comes when you finally ask yourself, what am I getting in return? Not because love is a transaction, but because relationships are meant to nourish both souls. You begin to realize that your role is not to fix, to save, or to serve endlessly. Your role is to be whole. And in your wholeness, you no longer tolerate emotional imbalance masked as need. Sometimes, the most loving act you can offer someone who drains you is distance. Not abandonment, but boundary. Not cruelty, but clarity. You step back, not to punish them, but to protect what is sacred within. You stop answering every call. You stop rescuing them from their chaos. You let them feel the discomfort of their own life, because that is the only space in which they might finally begin to grow. You are not responsible for someone else's healing journey. You can walk beside them. You can cheer for them. But you cannot carry them. When you carry someone too long, they forget they have legs. And you forget you have a destination of your own. So be mindful. Notice where your energy leaks. Pay attention to the people who leave you depleted. You were not born to be someone's emotional battery. You were born to shine, to expand, to be in relationships that are mutual, sacred, and alive. Choose people who pour back into you. Choose people who notice when you're quiet, who ask how you're doing without needing something in return. Choose those who don't just take from your well, but help you refill it. And most importantly, choose yourself again and again. Not out of selfishness, but out of the deepest wisdom that your energy is not unlimited, and your heart was never meant to be currency for someone else's survival. There's a kind of manipulation that wears the mask of vulnerability. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. Instead, it whispers just loud enough to make you question your worth, your morality, and your very goodness. It shows up in half-spoken phrases, in quiet sighs, and eyes that silently say, "You've let me down." This is not raw need. This is guilt, weaponized. It is subtle, but it is devastating. And if you are the kind of person who cares deeply, who hates the idea of being a disappointment, it will enslave you. Those who use guilt to control others don't always do so with malicious intent. Many are unaware of what they're doing. They've simply learned that sorrow is power, that helplessness buys loyalty, that if you can make someone feel responsible for your pain, they'll stay even when they're exhausted, even when they're breaking. They've mastered the art of emotional seduction, not through love, but through obligation. And if you don't see it clearly, you'll confuse it with compassion. You'll recognize them not by what they ask, but by how they make you feel when you say no. They may not argue. They may not yell, but you'll feel it, the chill in their voice, the sudden silence, the look that says, "I knew you'd let me down like everyone else." And you'll wonder, am I being heartless? Am I abandoning someone who needs me? This is the trap. Because guilt rewires your instincts. It makes your no feel violent. It makes self-respect feel like betrayal. And over time, it turns your love into servitude. A young man once told me about his relationship with his mother. She was not outwardly abusive. She never hit, never shouted, but her sadness was a constant presence in the home. Whenever he tried to set boundaries, to move out, to make decisions for himself, she'd get sick. Not physically, but emotionally. She would retreat into silence, refusing to eat, sitting alone in the dark. She wouldn't say, "Don't go." She would say, "I'm fine," but her tone would say, "You're killing me." And so he stayed year after year. Not out of love, but out of guilt. He wasn't living his life, he was managing her emotions. This is how guilt-based manipulation works. It makes you the keeper of someone else's mood. It places their well-being in your hands and calls it love. But it's not love, it's control dressed in suffering. It's a subtle form of emotional blackmail. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to hear your own voice. Because your identity becomes fused with their approval, you start to measure your goodness by how much discomfort you can absorb. You start believing that saying yes when you want to say no is noble, That silence is maturity. That putting yourself last is the price of love, but none of that is true. Real love does not need your guilt. Real love does not sulk when it doesn't get its way. Real love does not punish honesty with silence. If someone makes you feel like a villain for choosing yourself, it's not your heart that's wrong, it's your boundaries that are missing. People who manipulate through guilt are often deeply wounded themselves. They may have been abandoned, rejected, or neglected. Somewhere along the way, they learn that pain gives them power. That if they can make others feel bad, they can feel safe. But you are not their savior. And it is not your job to heal their childhood. Your empathy cannot fix someone's emotional immaturity. You can understand someone's pain without allowing them to inflict it on you. One of the most painful realizations in the healing journey is this: sometimes we have to disappoint people in order to stay true to ourselves. And sometimes those people will make us feel like monsters for it. They will say we're selfish, cold, ungrateful. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer under my control. And that to them feels like betrayal, but it's not betrayal, it's liberation. Choosing to walk away from someone who manipulates you through guilt is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-respect. It's a declaration that your emotional life is not up for negotiation. It's a vow that your peace matters, even if it disappoints someone else. It is one of the hardest things you will ever do because guilt is sticky, it doesn't let go easily. But if you endure it long enough, if you sit in the discomfort without rushing back to fix it, something sacred happens. Your clarity returns, you begin to hear your own voice again. You begin to recognize the difference between guilt and truth. You begin to see that you are not responsible for the feelings of those who weaponize their wounds. That you can love someone and still let them feel the consequences of their manipulation. That protecting your peace is not abandonment, it's maturity. In the end, you realize that freedom doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels like loss, like coldness, like silence. But that silence is not the absence of love, it is the presence of truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is the beginning of peace. So if you find yourself constantly apologizing for your boundaries, if you feel sick when you say no, if love feels like a performance, a duty, a quiet war between guilt and self-worth, it's time to ask a deeper question. Who taught me that my needs are a threat to someone else's comfort? And more importantly, what am I willing to lose to get myself back? Because in the end, the cost of helping someone who manipulates through guilt is not just your time or your energy, it's your freedom. And that, more than anything, is too precious to trade. At some point in every soul's journey, there comes a moment where the heart must choose between the comfort of familiar pain and the courage of personal truth. To withhold help from those who cannot or will not meet us halfway is not an act of cruelty. It is the boundary line between compassion and self-betrayal. True love does not ask us to disappear. Real care does not require our silence. And genuine goodness never demands that we bleed to keep others warm. You were not born to be everyone's savior. You were not made to carry what others refuse to hold. There is wisdom in discernment. There is power in boundaries. There is healing in choosing yourself. Not because you are selfish, but because you finally understand that your energy, your empathy, your time, and your spirit are sacred. Some people will never change until life forces them to. Some people will misuse your love, not because they are evil, but because they are unconscious. And some people will beg you to stay in their chaos not because they need you, but because your presence allows them to avoid their own reckoning. Let them go, not with hate, not with anger, but with the quiet knowing that your peace is your responsibility. You are allowed to love people from a distance. You are allowed to choose silence over explanation. You are allowed to say, this is as far as I go with you, and walk away, because the moment you stop trying to save everyone is the moment you start saving yourself. And in that sacred space, where your soul is no longer for sale, something extraordinary happens. Your clarity sharpens, your strength returns, and your life begins to fill with people who give as much as they take, love as deeply as you do, and grow beside you rather than cling beneath you. Choose them, but most of all, Choose you. Again and again, until it no longer feels like a choice but the natural rhythm of a life lived in truth.